All right, hello again. This is the last thing today. It's just called the zero product rule. And it means this. It means if I have any two things multiplied together and I get zero, that means either A equals zero or B equals zero. You can think about that for a minute, but the only way to get a zero from a multiplication problem is for one of the two things to be zero. So this tells me if I have two things multiplied and it equals zero, then either the first one is zero or the second one is zero. And we're going to use that here to solve these equations. So again, I'm going to assume that you remember what I just talked about in the previous video about factoring. And we look for two numbers whose product is negative 20, but that add up to negative 1. And I'm going to skip all the work and tell you that it's negative 5 and 4. Negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. Negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1, which is the number here in front of k. So that means that this left side here factors into k minus 5 and k plus 4. And that's the right side still equals 0. And this helps us because I now have two things multiplied. This thing in blue and this thing in green. I multiply these things together, k minus 5 times k plus 4, and it equals 0. That means either k minus 5 equals 0 or k plus 4 equals 0. I'm going to say that again. If I have two things multiplied, like I do, and the answer is 0, it means either the first thing I multiplied is 0 or the second thing I multiplied is 0. So I can just write those down. This one says if k minus 5 is 0, then k is 5. You'd solve this by adding 5 to both sides, and they get k equals 5. And if the second thing is 0, I'm out of room here a little bit. I'm not sure. So I'm just going to say the second one, if the second one is 0, I'd subtract 4 from both sides, and I would get k equals 4. So this tells me that the two answers to this problem, k is either 5, that's negative 4. I did that wrong. If I subtract 4 from both sides here, I get negative 4. This tells me that k is either equal to 5 or it's equal to negative 4. This is called this is factoring first, and then we use the zero product rule to get the answers. The zero product rule, that's what this is called. I'm going to probably reference that later on. So I can do the same thing here. I see everything is positive in this one. Well, first of all, there's a 1 in front of the x squared, so I can use the trick that we learned in the previous video. I need two numbers that multiply to give me 5, but that add up to 6. And the only factors of 5 are 1 and 5. And conveniently, those numbers add up to 6. So I'm going to use a positive 1 and a positive 5. Oops, it's not k anymore, it's x. About to write a k. So I know 1 times 5 is 5, 1 plus 5 is 6, that checks out. I get x plus 1 times x plus 5, still equal to 0. That doesn't go away. And now I use this rule again. I say, well, either if this times this equals 0, then either the first one is 0, which means x equals negative 1, or x plus 5 is 0. Which means x equals negative 5. So my two answers are x equals negative 1 and negative 5. You can always check these by plugging them back into the original one and seeing if you get 0. I'll do that for this one. So let's say I'm going to try negative 1 back in the original problem. So I say negative 1 squared plus 6 times negative 1 plus 5 equals 0. Let's see, negative 1 squared is 1. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6 plus 5 is 0. Let's see, 1 plus 5 is 6 minus 6 is 0. That checks out. Awesome. I'm not hugely surprised that worked, but I'm glad that it did. And we can do the same thing with these two. So this is a type 1. There's a 1 in front of the x squared. I look for two numbers who multiply to give me a positive 10, but add up to negative 7. The only factors of 10 are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. And they need to both be negative here because this is going to be a positive number. So either both positive or both negative. And since this is a negative here, they both have to be negative. So I try -1, -10, -2, -5, and I can see this adds up to -11, which doesn't work, but this adds up to -7, which does work. So I'm going to use -2 and -5. Say x minus 2 times x minus 5 equals 0. If x minus 2 is 0, then x equals 2. And if x minus 5 equals 0, then x equals 5. So my two possible answers are x equals 2 and x equals 5. And I will leave the checking of these answers to you. And by checking, I mean going back up to the original problem. What is happening with this marker here? What I mean by checking them is I mean go back up to the original problem and plug in 2 and see if you get 0. And then plug in 5 and see if you get 0. Now I'll do this last one just for the sake of completion. I need a product of -20 and I need a sum of -1. So let's see, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 2 and 10, 4 and 5. The difference here is 19, that's no good. The difference here is 8, that's no good. The difference here though is 1, and that is what I wanted. I want a -1, which means I need the 5 to be negative, because 4 minus 5 is -1. So I'm going to do x plus 4 and x minus 5 equals 0. Don't forget the equal 0. And so if x plus 4 is 0, then x is -4. And if x minus 5 is 0, then x is equal to 5. So my two answers are x equals -4, 4, and 5. So that's how the zero product rule works. Again, it's just factoring with like a little additional tidbit at the end where you set the two factors equal to 0 and solve. And that's how we solve quadratic equations. Hope this was helpful.